The Arizona sun hung merciless in the October sky, casting long shadows across the barren hilltop where Samuel Sam McCready stood, his weathered hands working the rope with practiced precision. 63 years of life had carved deep lines into his face, each wrinkle a testament to loss, regret, and the crushing weight of solitude. The cottonwood tree before him had been dead for years, its branches bleached white by countless seasons of unforgiving heat. Yet it stood strong enough for what Sam intended. The noose felt familiar in his calloused fingers, not the first he'd tied, though the others had been for different purposes in different times. Below the hill stretched the vast emptiness of the Sonoran Desert, painted in shades of rust and gold. In the distance, the town of Esperanza sat like a collection of scattered bones, its adobe buildings shimmering in the heat haze. Sam had called it home for 30 years, though home was perhaps too generous a word for a place where he'd buried 2 wives, lost 3 children to fever, and watched his ranch crumble to dust. The wind whispered through the dead branches, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day. Sam tested the rope's strength, pulling it taut around the thickest branch. His movements were methodical, almost ceremonial, as if he were performing one last task before eternal rest. "Should have done this years ago," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse from disuse. Weeks could pass without Sam speaking to another soul, and his vocal cords had grown accustomed to silence. The town folks avoided him now, the crazy old hermit who talked to his dead horses and drank his meals from a bottle. He positioned the makeshift platform, an old wooden crate that had once held supplies for his long-defunct ranch. The irony wasn't lost on him. Even in death, he'd make use of the remnants of his failed dreams. Sam slipped the noose around his neck, feeling the rough hemp against his weathered skin. The rope was tight but not uncomfortable. Not yet. He closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him one final time. Sarah's laughter on their wedding day, little Emma's first steps, the sound of cattle lowing in the evening air when his herd numbered in the hundreds rather than 0. But those memories were ghosts now, and ghosts couldn't fill the empty bottles or quiet the accusations that echoed in his mind during the long, sleepless nights. The Apache raids of '82 had taken his cattle. The drought of '85 had taken his crops. The fever of '88 had taken his family. What was left was just a shell of a man, going through the motions of living without any real purpose. Sam opened his eyes and looked out over the desert one last time. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, unforgiving but honest. Unlike people, the desert didn't pretend to care. It simply existed, indifferent to human suffering or joy. He lifted his right foot, preparing to kick away the crate that held him suspended between earth and eternity. The rope creaked softly against the branch. One quick motion, and 40 years of guilt and loneliness would finally end. But as his foot began to move, a sound reached his ears. Soft, desperate, human. Sam froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. There, stumbling up the rocky slope, was a figure that seemed to emerge from the desert itself. A young woman, her long black hair wild and tangled, her face streaked with dust and tears. She wore the traditional clothing of the Apache, a deerskin dress adorned with turquoise beads that caught the sunlight as she moved. But it was her condition that stopped Sam cold. She was heavily pregnant, her belly round and full beneath the fabric. She saw him standing there with the noose around his neck and cried out, a sound so raw and desperate that it cut through Sam's despair like a knife. Without hesitation, she fell to her knees in the dust, her hands pressed to her swollen belly. "Please," she gasped, her English accented but clear, learned perhaps at one of the mission schools. "Please, don't go." Sam stared down at her, his foot still poised above the crate. The young woman's eyes were dark brown, almost black, and filled with a terror that had nothing to do with his intended suicide, and everything to do with something, or someone, she was running from. "Please," she repeated, her voice breaking. I need help." The rope felt suddenly heavy around Sam's neck, not from its physical weight, but from the weight of choice. Here was a pregnant woman, alone in the desert, asking for his help. The irony was almost laughable. He'd been ready to abandon life, just as life itself knelt before him, begging for protection. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind continued its whisper through the dead branches, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Sam looked into the young woman's eyes and saw something he'd forgotten existed. Hope mixed with desperation, the kind of combination that could drive a person to extraordinary acts. Slowly, carefully, Sam stepped down from the crate. The noose loosened around his neck as he bent forward, his joints protesting after years of hard living. He reached up and slipped the rope over his head, letting it fall to the dusty ground. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "Ayana," she whispered, still kneeling. "It means eternal blossom in my language." Sam nodded, extending a weathered hand to help her to her feet. "Well, Ayana, I'm Sam McCready, and it seems like we both got some living left to do." Sam's cabin sat in a hollow between two hills, hidden from the main road to Esperanza by a grove of mesquite trees. It wasn't much to look at. Weathered wood, a sagging roof, and windows so dusty they barely let in light. But it had water from a small well and walls thick enough to stop bullets, which had proven useful more than once in Sam's troubled past. Ayana walked beside him in silence, her hand pressed protectively to her belly. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Sam could see sweat beading on her forehead despite her stoic expression. Apache women were taught to endure pain without complaint, but pregnancy in the desert heat was a trial that tested even the strongest constitution. "Not much further," Sam said, adjusting his pace to match her shorter steps. He'd grabbed his rifle and what little remained of his water supply before leaving the hilltop, old habits of caution asserting themselves even in his transformed state of mind. "You live alone out here?" Ayana asked, her voice still strained from exhaustion and whatever terror had driven her to seek help from a stranger. "Been alone for near 10 years now," Sam replied, pushing aside a low-hanging branch to clear her path. "Wife and children, fever took them all in '88. Haven't had much use for company since." Ayana nodded, understanding etched in her dark eyes. Loss was universal, transcending the barriers between white and Apache, between the settlers and the first people of this harsh land. "I am sorry," she said simply, and Sam believed she meant it. They reached the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Sam pushed open the door, which creaked on rusted hinges, and gestured for Ayana to enter first. She hesitated at the threshold, her instincts warring with necessity. Trust did not come easily, when your people had been hunted, displaced, and betrayed for generations. "It's safe," Sam assured her, reading her reluctance correctly. "Whatever you're running from, they won't find you here. This place might be a wreck, but it's hidden well enough." Ayana stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, a bed in one corner, and shelves lined with supplies. The scent of coffee grounds and tobacco lingered in the air, mixed with the mustiness of a place where one man had lived alone with his ghosts for too long. "Sit," Sam commanded gently, indicating the single chair beside the table. "You need rest and water." As Ayana settled herself carefully, Sam busied himself at the fireplace, building a small fire to heat water for coffee. His movements were economical, practiced, the actions of a man who had lived alone long enough to develop his own rhythms and routines. "Who's after you?" he asked without turning around, feeding kindling to the growing flames. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Ayana was quiet for so long that Sam began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband," she said, the words seeming to cost her great effort. "Thomas Brennan, he was a trader who came to our reservation. He married me when I was 16, promised my father horses and goods for our people." Sam turned to face her, seeing the pain and shame in her expression. He brought me to his ranch near Tucson. For 2 years I tried to be a good wife." She touched her belly protectively. "But he drank much whiskey, and when he drank, he became angry. Very angry." Sam's jaw tightened. He'd known men like Brennan, men who saw Apache women as property to be owned rather than partners to be cherished. The territory was full of such predators, taking advantage of desperate families struggling to survive on the inadequate reservations. "The child," Sam said, nodding toward her swollen abdomen. "It's his?" Ayana's hand moved in a protective circle over her belly. "Yes, but when I told him I was carrying his baby, he became worse. He said he didn't want a half-breed child, that it would shame him with the other white ranchers." Her voice broke slightly. 2 days ago, he wanted to hurt the baby, to make it go away." Sam's hands clenched into fists. So you ran. I ran. But Thomas knows these lands, and he has men who work for him. Bad men who do whatever he pays them to do. Ayana looked up at Sam with desperate eyes. He will not stop looking for me. He cannot let others know that his Apache wife escaped him. It would make him seem weak. Sam poured hot water over coffee grounds, the familiar ritual giving him time to think. He'd spent 40 years in this territory, watching it change from wild frontier to something resembling civilization. But civilization, he'd learned, was often just a thin veneer covering the same old cruelties and prejudices. "How far is Brennan's ranch from here?" he asked, handing her a tin cup filled with strong black coffee. 2 days' ride, maybe 3, but he has friends in Esperanza, men who might recognize me if I went to town. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. "I cannot go back to my people either. My father, he would not welcome a daughter who shamed herself by running from her white husband." Sam settled himself on the edge of his bed, studying Ayana's face in the firelight. She was beautiful despite her exhaustion and fear. High cheekbones, clear brown skin, and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. But more than her beauty, he saw her strength. Running away while heavily pregnant, crossing dangerous desert terrain, seeking help from a complete stranger, it took courage that most people, himself included, could barely comprehend. "You can stay here," he said finally. "At least until the baby comes and you're strong enough to travel." Ayana's eyes widened. "You would do this for a stranger? For an Apache?" Sam was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Lady, an hour ago I was fixing to hang myself from a dead tree. Figured I had nothing left to live for." He met her gaze directly. "Maybe helping you is exactly what I need to live for." Outside the cabin, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing across the barren landscape. Somewhere in that vastness, Thomas Brennan and his men were likely beginning their search, following tracks and asking questions. But for now, in this small sanctuary of weathered wood and flickering firelight, 2 broken souls had found temporary peace. Ayana sipped her coffee slowly, studying Sam's weathered face. "Why did you want to die?" she asked softly. Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Because I thought I'd lost everything worth living for," he said finally. "Turns out I was wrong." The 3rd day dawned grey and oppressive, with heavy clouds building over the mountains to the west. Sam had been awake since before sunrise, moving quietly around the cabin so as not to disturb Ayana's rest. Pregnancy and exhaustion had finally claimed her the night before, and she'd slept deeply for the first time in days. Sam stood at the single window, peering through a gap in the dusty curtains at the desert beyond. Something felt wrong. In 40 years of frontier living, he'd developed an instinct for danger that had kept him alive through Apache raids, range wars, and countless other perils. That instinct was screaming now. The birds were wrong. Usually the morning brought a chorus of desert larks and mockingbirds, but today the silence stretched unbroken, except for the whisper of wind through the mesquite. Animals always knew when predators were near. "You feel it too." Ayana's voice came softly from behind him. Sam turned to find her sitting up on the makeshift bed he'd prepared for her near the fireplace. Her dark eyes were alert, despite having just awakened. "Feel what?" Sam asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "The hunting feeling, like when coyotes circle a wounded deer." Ayana placed both hands on her belly, her expression tense. "My people say the desert speaks to those who know how to listen." Sam nodded grimly. "Reckon the desert's got plenty to say this morning." He moved to his gun cabinet, a sturdy wooden box that held his few remaining weapons. His fingers traced the familiar outline of his Winchester rifle, a .44-40 that had served him faithfully for 15 years. "How many men would Brennan bring?" Sam asked, checking the rifle's action and loading it with practiced efficiency. Ayana considered this carefully. "Thomas is not brave alone, but he has money to hire brave men. Jake Morrison, his foreman, he fought in the Indian Wars. Cruel man who enjoys hurting people. And there are others, drifters who work for whoever pays them." "How many?" Sam pressed. "Maybe 4 or 5 men, not counting Thomas himself." Sam did the mathematics in his head. 6 men against 1 aging cowboy and a pregnant woman, with no hope of help from town. The odds weren't encouraging, but Sam had faced worse. During the range wars of the 70s, he'd held off 8 rustlers for 2 days before help arrived. Of course, he'd been 20 years younger then, and fighting for cattle rather than human life. A sound from outside made both of them freeze, the distant whinny of a horse carried on the morning breeze. Sam moved quickly to the window again, his rifle ready. Through the mesquite grove he could make out movement, dark shapes against the lighter desert, still perhaps a mile away but definitely approaching. "They found us," Ayanna whispered, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Sam's mind raced through their options. Running was impossible with Ayanna in her condition. She could barely walk a mile, much less outpace mounted men across rough terrain. Fighting from the cabin gave them better odds, but it also meant being trapped if things went badly. "Listen to me carefully," Sam said, moving to a loose floorboard near the fireplace. He pried it up, revealing a hiding space he'd carved out years ago during the Apache troubles. Inside were supplies he'd hoped never to need again: extra ammunition, dried food, and most importantly, a sawed-off shotgun wrapped in oilcloth. "If they get past me, you hide in here," Sam instructed, pulling out the shotgun and checking its loads. "Don't come out no matter what you hear, understand? Even if they burn the cabin down around you, you wait until you're sure they're gone." Ayanna shook her head firmly. "I will not hide while you fight my battles." "This ain't about pride," Sam said harshly. "This is about that baby you're carrying. You think your child wants to be born into slavery? Because its mother was too stubborn to hide when she had the chance." The words hit their mark. Ayanna's hand moved protectively to her belly, and Sam saw the internal struggle in her expression. Apache culture valued courage above almost everything else, but motherhood demanded different kinds of strength. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied now by voices, men calling to each other as they searched the desert. Sam positioned himself at the window, rifle ready, and tried to count the approaching riders. 4 men, maybe 5, spread out in a loose line as they approached the mesquite grove. "Ayanna!" A voice bellowed across the desert, harsh and commanding. "I know you're out there, you savage bitch. Come out now and I might go easy on the old man who's been hiding you." Thomas Brennan. Even from a distance, Sam could hear the whiskey slur in the man's voice. Drunk men were unpredictable, capable of escalating violence without warning. "Maybe I should go to him," Ayanna whispered. "End this before you get hurt." "Like hell you will," Sam replied, his finger finding the rifle's trigger. "I made you a promise, and I keep my promises." The riders had reached the edge of the mesquite grove now, close enough for Sam to make out individual features. Brennan rode in the center, a thick-set man with a red face and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the desert. The others were exactly what Sam had expected, hard-faced men with the look of professional gunfighters, the kind who drifted from town to town selling their skills to whoever paid best. One of them, a lean man with a scarred face who must be Morrison, raised his hand to halt the group. He studied the cabin for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in the defensive positions and potential escape routes. "Place looks quiet," Morrison called to Brennan. "Could be they moved on already." "They're here," Brennan insisted, swaying slightly in his saddle. "I can smell that Apache whore from here." Sam's jaw tightened at the crude words, but he forced himself to remain calm. Anger made men careless, and carelessness got people killed. Morrison seemed to agree with Sam's assessment. "Boss, maybe you ought to let us handle this. You're not exactly steady right now." "Don't tell me how to handle my own wife," Brennan snarled, spurring his horse toward the cabin. "Ayanna, get out here now, or I'll burn this whole place down with everyone in it." Sam took careful aim at Brennan's chest, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. One shot would end the immediate threat, but it would also turn the others into enemies with nothing left to lose. Sometimes the best solution was also the most dangerous. "Last chance," Brennan shouted, now close enough that Sam could see the madness in his bloodshot eyes. "Come out, or the old man dies first." Sam felt Ayanna move behind him, heard her soft intake of breath as she prepared to sacrifice herself for his safety. But Sam McCready had spent too many years living with regret to add another burden to his conscience. He squeezed the trigger, and the Winchester's report echoed across the desert like thunder. The Winchester's bullet caught Thomas Brennan in the shoulder, spinning him sideways in his saddle with a scream of pain and rage. His horse reared, throwing him hard to the desert floor, where he lay groaning and clutching his wounded arm. "Thomas is down," Morrison shouted, his own rifle already coming up as he sought cover behind a large boulder. The other 3 men scattered, their horses dancing nervously as gunfire erupted across the small valley. Sam worked the Winchester's lever, ejecting the spent shell and chambering a fresh round in one smooth motion. 40 years of frontier living had taught him that the first shot was often the most important, but rarely the last. "Stay back," he called to Morrison and the others. "The man's been shot, but he ain't dead. Take him and ride out, and nobody else needs to get hurt." Morrison's response was a rifle bullet that splintered the wooden frame inches from Sam's head. The message was clear. They hadn't come this far to leave empty-handed. From her position near the fireplace, Ayanna watched Sam move with a fluid efficiency that spoke of long experience in deadly situations. Gone was the broken old man she'd found preparing to hang himself. In his place stood a seasoned fighter, calm and methodical even as bullets began to punch holes in the cabin's weathered walls. "How many bullets do you have?" Ayanna asked quietly. "Enough," Sam replied, though privately he knew the mathematics weren't in their favor. He had perhaps 20 rounds for the Winchester, a dozen shells for the shotgun, and whatever was in his old Colt revolver. Against 4 experienced gunmen, it might not be sufficient. Outside, Morrison was organizing his men with the practiced efficiency of a former cavalry sergeant. "Jake, you and Martinez circle around back. Billy, stay here and keep them pinned down. I'm going to try the north side." Sam heard the orders and felt a grudging respect for his opponent. Morrison was doing exactly what Sam would have done in his position: divide the defender's attention while closing in from multiple directions. "They're moving to surround us," Sam told Ayanna. "Time for you to get in that hiding spot." But Ayanna shook her head, reaching for the sawed-off shotgun. "My grandmother fought beside my grandfather against the Bluecoats in the Dragoon Mountains. Apache women do not hide when their protectors are outnumbered." Before Sam could protest, she had positioned herself at the cabin's single back window, the shotgun cradled in her arms despite her advanced pregnancy. Her face was set with the same determination Sam had seen in Apache warriors who knew they were facing death but refused to surrender. The first probing attack came from the north side, where Morrison tried to approach under cover of a dry creek bed. Sam's rifle spoke twice, forcing the gunman back but without hitting him. In response, a hail of bullets shattered the cabin's remaining windows, filling the air with splinters and dust. "Got movement back here," Ayanna called, and the shotgun's thunder filled the small space as she fired both barrels at 2 men trying to approach through the mesquite. Her aim was true. One man cried out and stumbled, while the other dove for cover. Sam felt a fierce pride at her courage, mixed with terror at what would happen if they were overrun. But there was no time for emotion now, only the deadly dance of action and reaction that would determine whether they lived to see another sunrise. The battle continued for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Sam's ammunition dwindled steadily as he kept the attackers at bay, while Ayanna proved surprisingly deadly with the shotgun whenever anyone tried to approach the cabin's rear. Then, just as Sam was beginning to fear the worst, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached his ears. But these came from the direction of town, not from Brennan's scattered men. "Hold your fire," a familiar voice called across the desert. "This is Sheriff Coleman. Everybody just calm down." Sam risked a look out the shattered window and saw 6 riders approaching under a white flag of truce. Leading them was Jake Coleman, Esperanza's longtime sheriff, a fair man who commanded respect from both the Anglo settlers and the Apache people who occasionally came to town for supplies. Morrison and his remaining men were already lowering their weapons, recognizing the futility of fighting both Sam and the law. Thomas Brennan still lay groaning in the dust where he'd fallen, his expensive shirt now soaked with blood. "Sam McCready," Sheriff Coleman called. "You all right in there?" "We're fine, Jake," Sam replied, though he kept his rifle ready. "But I got a pregnant woman in here who needs protection from these bastards." Coleman dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously, his hands visible but ready to draw if necessary. "Thomas Brennan, you're under arrest for disturbing the peace and attempted murder. Morrison, you and your boys drop your weapons now, or you'll be joining him in jail." "This is none of your business, Coleman," Brennan snarled from the ground. "That savage is my wife, and I got every right to bring her home." "Mister, I seen the tracks leading here, and I seen the bullet holes in this cabin," Coleman replied coldly. "Looks to me like you brought enough firepower to start a war." "That's my business." What Sam didn't know was that Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, had seen Brennan and his men buying ammunition and asking questions about Apache women. Suspicious and knowing Sam's reputation as a decent man despite his recent troubles, she'd convinced her husband to ride for the sheriff As Morrison and his men reluctantly surrendered their weapons, Sam finally allowed himself to relax slightly, but his attention was immediately drawn to Ayanna, who had begun breathing hard, her face pale with more than just exhaustion. "Sam," she whispered, her hand pressed to her belly. I think the baby is coming." The next hours blurred together in a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Martinez, summoned from town by one of Coleman's deputies, arrived to find Sam boiling water and tearing sheets, while Ayanna labored with the stoic endurance of her people. Brennan, his shoulder roughly bandaged, was hauled away in chains along with Morrison and the surviving members of his crew. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, a new life entered the world. The baby, a girl with her mother's dark hair and eyes, announced her arrival with a healthy cry that seemed to chase away the last shadows of violence and fear. "She's beautiful," Sam said softly, looking down at the tiny face as Ayanna cradled her daughter. "What will you call her?" Ayanna considered this for a moment, her exhausted features peaceful for the first time since Sam had met her. "Hope," she said finally. "In your language, Hope, because she was born in a place where hope was reborn." Dr. Martinez packed his instruments, satisfied that both mother and child were healthy. "Mrs. Brennan," he said gently, "you know that your husband will likely go to prison for what happened here. You'll need to decide what you want to do about your situation." Ayanna looked at Sam, who was awkwardly but tenderly holding the baby while she rested. "I am no longer Mrs. Brennan," she said firmly. "Apache law says a woman can divorce a man who tries to harm her children. I choose to be Ayanna again. Just Ayanna." Sheriff Coleman, who had stayed to ensure everyone's safety, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ma'am, if you need somewhere to stay while you recover, the church has a room. Reverend Thompson's wife would be happy to help with the baby." But Sam spoke before Ayanna could answer. "She's got a place to stay," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "This cabin's got room for 3, and Lord knows I could use the company." Ayanna smiled, the first truly happy expression Sam had seen on her face. "Are you sure, Sam McCready? An old cowboy, an Apache woman, and a baby. The town will talk." Sam looked out at the desert, where he'd almost ended his life just days before, then back at the woman who had saved him simply by asking him not to go. "Let them talk," he said. "I got more important things to worry about than gossip." 3 months later, as autumn painted the desert in gold and crimson, Sam McCready could be found every evening sitting on his repaired porch, teaching a baby girl to laugh, while her mother prepared dinner inside the cabin. The noose still hung from the dead cottonwood on the hill, but now it served a different purpose, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest dawns. The old cowboy had found his reason to live, and in saving her, Ayanna had saved them both. In the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, 3 souls had become a family, bound not by blood or law, but by the simple truth that sometimes the greatest love comes from the most unexpected places. And on clear nights, when the desert wind sang through the mesquite and the stars shone bright overhead, Sam would hold little hope and whisper stories of second chances, of redemption found in the most unlikely moments, and of how an Apache woman's plea had given an old cowboy the greatest gift of all, a future worth living for.